Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Talking Success. As you can probably see, the surroundings are quite different, which means that this is actually quite a serious podcast today. I'm joined by none other than James Saunders and Bradley Elliot from RelyComply. We're here to talk about a few things today, all focused around financial crime. But what we'd like to do is talk to you about some of the real topics here, some of the things that perhaps people don't really understand, some of the impacts involved with financial crime, what that actually does to people, to animals, to all sorts of different things across the world, really. So, stay tuned. We have a couple of interesting announcements to make as well during this podcast. So keep watching. And James, Bradley, great to see you. I'm going to call you Brad. I'm going to call you Bradley, if that's all right. So it's good to have you guys on board. Thanks so much for joining today. Listen, be good if you can give a quick intro. I know, Brad, we've done a podcast before. Yeah. It was quite some time ago, and it wasn't quite in such luxurious surroundings. I think you were in a cupboard or something from the memory. It looked like it anyway. But
where I belong.
Absolutely. So, guys, if you can give a quick intro in terms of yourselves, a bit about RelyComply, and then I'm going to delve into some of the topics that I think are important to raise.
So I'm James Saunders. I'm the CTO and co-founder of RelyComply. And RelyComply is a end-to-end platform to help big financial enterprises deal with their financial crime problem. So I'm on both the sort of technical and the investigation side.
Okay, fantastic. Your background's more on the technical or investigation? Or?
My background is originally in mathematics.
Wow, okay.
And then computer science, and then a few things that got me into this.
Awesome. Thank you. Brad, yourself?
Cool. Yeah, I'm Brad. I'm the CEO of RelyComply. I joined the business about 2 years ago. So, yeah, really excited to be on the journey. And, yeah, I think James has given a good enough intro on RelyComply and what we do. Really looking forward to chatting to you more about some of the problems we solve, hopefully.
And you guys focus on the enterprise space, right? So your customers typically are banks, financial services institutions. Do you cover anything sort of outside of FSPs, or is that not really your focus?
Some large scaling or fast, rapidly growing fintechs.
Okay.
So like digital natives in the payment space or, in the financial services space, but fintechs effectively, right? I think, ultimately everyone is going to become a fintech one day, but yeah, really more large financial services institutions and rapidly scaling fintechs.
And I suppose the essence of AML, financial crime, it's been brought to a head, certainly here in South Africa over the last year or so with the FATF grey listing. And that had a big impact, I imagine, on organizations and enterprises. What sort of repercussions have you seen from that? Has sort of compliance tightened up? Have the banks or the institutions that you guys support, are they now more focused and they have more budgets available for things like AML and KYB and what have you?
So let me take this one.
Yeah.
There have been quite a few things that have happened. So traditionally, sort of your compliance functions in a bank or other big enterprise was very much sort of a checkbox exercise. It was check a few simple things, report them, you're happy. Very much legal accounting sort of background. But over, especially the last year with grey listing, but really moving over maybe the last sort of 5 to 10 years, there's been a big change in what the regulator expects from, especially your larger financial institutions. Rather than just sort of a checkbox exercise, they expect these large corporates to really be able to make an impact, moving from just being regulation to actual investigation, actually worrying about stopping these financial crimes.
Yeah.
And I think the important thing to sort of recognize there's sometimes, money laundering, it can be a bit abstract. It's, a secondary or tertiary crime. But behind it, there's always a predicate crime. And that's something very serious. That's either large-scale corruption, drug trafficking, human trafficking, ultimately the business of crime.
Terrorism, financing.
Yeah.
Requires a way to get its money into the legitimate ecosystem. And that is what money laundering really is.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what we've seen, especially as the economy has just become way more digital, you have far more sort of mechanisms of moving finance around, that sort of central leverage point that the financial system and the players in the financial system can hold is incredibly important for dealing with crime in general.
Can we just pick up before we come on to your, or maybe you can answer this, but you touched on sort of the ramifications and the actual results in money laundering. And I think a lot of people may think, well, money laundering, it's about the banks and, they get in a bit of trouble. And, we've seen some of the massive banks in Europe getting fined, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. But you mentioned human trafficking. You mentioned drugs, you mentioned terrorism. There's also wildlife trafficking as well, which I know is a big thing, certainly in this part of the world. Do you think people, the general public, have an understanding of why there are these sort of controls and there are the requirements to go through KYC checks and go through, if you're a business and you want to register for a payments platform, for example, you have to go through KYB checks. Do you think people understand the reason why they have to do that, or they're being asked to do that? Do you think the general sort of, let's call them consumer, understands the implications of what money laundering and financial crime could result to if things aren't followed?
I don't want to make any radical assumptions, but I'd say I don't think like the education level of like not the consumer's education level, but the market educating the consumer on why this is necessary is good enough, right? It's seen, most people will be like, oh, I've got to go through compliance. They call it compliance. They don't go, oh, I'm going through this check because, money laundering has a real effect on the economy. So I think they understand that banks and big financial services providers are doing this to mitigate risk. I'm not sure if they always understand what that risk might necessarily be. And to call a spade, most people just find it really annoying to have to go through it, right? Yeah. It's just a pain. It's kind of like having to go through airport security, but it's necessary.
And James, you mentioned the element of going through sort of an AML process and talking about how this sort of manifests into something that is kind of a lot broader than just, a tick box. And certainly for financial services institutions, do you feel that this has gone from more being reactive to proactive? So is the regulator now saying, actually, you need to be proactive in what you're doing as opposed to just reactive and reporting? Is that the kind of message you were giving?
So I think it's both from the regulator, but also the sort of reputational damage that happens when either you allow sort of mass fraud or you get implicated in banking some very dodgy politician or something like that.
Yeah.
That is also becoming a huge sort of push that's not really coming straight down from the regulator, but more coming from the market. So I think on both those sides, but definitely the expectation is now your job is to actually stop this, not just throw it up, hands up in the air and what can we do?
Yeah. So there's stopping it, preventing it, but there's also investigating it, which I guess is the next step. So are the regulators here in South Africa pushing for financial services organizations or enterprises, whatever they may be, to actually go and investigate and actually find out what the source of the crime was and sort of pass that on to, the prosecutor in order to, charge people or charge these syndicates for these crimes?
So this is sort of where potentially sort of the government and private sector are still finding each other. There was a lot of work done about 5 years ago, exactly because prosecutions were very low. That's probably the major thing that is keeping us on the grey list. We had the Fusion Center come together, which brings together your prosecutors, Hawks, Revenue Service, and obviously police, as well as the FIC, and that had some very good results. At the same time, there's a lot more comfort in the sort of public-private partnership around facilitating these sort of financial crime investigations. But it is still, it's obviously very sensitive data. You want to both protect people's privacy to the correct degree while also, stopping these. And there's a bit of a tension and balance there. Where that goes in the future, I think, is a much more active private sector involvement in this.
Okay, interesting. Brad, you got comments on that?
No, I agree with James. I think you were asking, what trends have we seen since the grey listing? I think that's the biggest one, is that there's a much closer public-private partnership happening between the regulators and the financial services institutions, and maybe not full kind of jurisdiction to go investigate just yet, but definitely to sharing of more data, I think, is where we're heading in the future between financial services institutes, or at least the regulators in the financial services institutes, to start being able to stop this from happening, because a money launderer will hop from one institute to another, right?
Yep.
And if they can do that sharing of data in a sensitive and kind of way that protects privacy and all those sorts of things, and obviously also commercial IP and those sorts of things between institutions, that's definitely going to help. But yeah, definitely a much tighter collaboration that I think people don't see. And as James mentioned, it's gone from a checkbox exercise into what they call a risk-based approach. Each institute has to now look at their risk holistically and decide on what their appetite is. And I think there's definitely another trend we've seen is there's definitely been a lot more visits and audits by the regulators to these institutes. They are constantly, we're hearing from our customers, all the time, that they're all the time doing audits and findings. Yep. Are they putting the pressure on the right places? That's a question we can sit and debate for a while, but yeah.
Yeah, I was with a client earlier on this week, and they're into lending, and they're not the same regulators, different regulator. I said it's great they come and they check, and we're absolutely for that. But what they're looking for is kind of like physical files and booklet files and levers. And they're like, we're a digital business, and I think that's perhaps where there's a bit of disconnect. Maybe this is going a bit off topic, but a bit of disconnect for fintech specifically, who are looking at being digital because that's the nature of their business, but also having to comply with regulations where they need to have physical ring binders. So I think there's still a bit of a mismatch. But listen, it was a great segue in terms of talking about the ecosystem and talking about collaboration between public and private sectors. Now, you guys, RelyComply, have been spearheading something that is very, very much a first for South Africa. It's on the 29th and 30th of August. And it's an event. I'm not calling it a conference because it's definitely it's an anti-conference conference, and it's called Decoding Financial Crime. Okay. Now, I'm a bit biased. I was kind of involved in this in a very early stage. Brad and I were sharing, and Reese, I think, as well, we're sharing a bottle of wine in a hotel, not a hotel room, no, in a hotel bar. Sorry, guys, in a hotel bar. And we came up with this idea. Well, actually, Brad came up with this idea. And it was one of those ideas where you go, after kind of a couple of bottles of wine, we're going to forget about this in the morning. And actually, no, we didn't. And we kept going and going and going. And all of a sudden, Decoding Financial Crime has come about. So I'll talk to you a bit about that in a moment. But you guys obviously want to be integral in this public sector, private sector community, and driving this as a really important, fundamental piece of the puzzle that's going to try and solve financial crime here in South Africa and further beyond. We'll talk about that in a bit later on. Brad and James, whoever, talk to me a little bit about why this is important, why you guys wanted to get behind an event like this, and what it means to you as individuals, but also as a business.
I think the idea around it was driven very much from, so we spoke about private and public partnership. And I think in all of the, as much collaboration as there is, there's often tension points. And, you've got these kind of round tables or whatever, sandbox environments where they discuss, certain regulation and how they can implement it and work better together. But a lot of the insight we were getting from some of our key stakeholders and customers was, there needs to be a place where they can really engage with not only the regulators, but with other industry peers in a place that is far more neutral, let's call it, and transparent. So, you've got these sandbox environments, but it's, either at the regulator or at the bank or whatever it may be. So no one really wants to be very honest with each other about their problems. And so how do you try facilitate something where they can have really meaningful engagement and really discuss the true problems in a very private setting, like very secure setting, because what they're discussing is highly sensitive, with the intention to move forward and work more closely together. Going back to your ring binder example with a fintech that is purely digital, the regulator, I think, is leaning on the private sector because they don't necessarily have the resources, both from a personnel point of view, but also from a technology point of view, to actually do a lot of what they want to do. So there needs to be, and us as a technology provider see a role in, hopefully kind of trying to bridge that gap from both a engagement perspective, but also from a technology perspective. I don't know, James, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, no, I think you've explained it pretty well.
Yeah.
But I think the sort of important thing to emphasize is this is a place where, or will be an event where the major players who are most affected by this can actually talk shop properly. It's not where people just get sold to and they get their free glass of wine and then go home. This is proper discussion.
And I think that's evident from the response that we've had to this anti-conference conference. We've got pretty much every regulator coming. We've got the Office of the Presidency coming. We have the Western Cape government coming. We have former detectives from the Hawks coming. We even have and this is the one I'm looking forward to most, we've even got a reformed money launderer who's going to be coming on stage and talking about A, why he did it, B, how he did it, and C, how he got caught. And I think for me, when we were talking about the agenda and we were looking at how do we make this something not only that's unique, because unique is great, but it needs to be tangible. It needs to be something that people can walk away with. And I think getting into the mind of criminals, for me, that was probably the biggest takeaway was, okay, so lots of compliance people and heads of compliance will sit around, they've been in their careers in compliance, but have they ever taken a step back to think, actually, what's the criminal mindset here? Now, if you're a prosecutor or you're a detective, that's your job, right? But people working within enterprise, is that something they're really thinking about? So for me, that's one of the things I'm looking forward to most. But we've got a few other things that we're doing throughout this event. I'm not going to spoil it. I'm not going to put any spoilers out here, I promise. But you mentioned the privacy and you mentioned this kind of safe space. And again, Brad, I think it was your idea in terms of how we facilitate that. I don't know if you remember the conversation. No, you don't. Okay,
probably not. But if you want to give me credit for that idea, I'll take it.
It was Brad's idea, but just to
that's probably your idea that you just kind of want to wrap into.
I'm just generous. But the idea behind this is there's a big Chatham House rules, within the conferences. Within the event itself. So there won't be any recordings. There won't be any media other than very select points. So it will be a very safe place for regulators and enterprise to be able to speak and communicate about really prevalent things. And I think that's so essential because, like you said, you walk into a bank's office or you walk into a lawyer's office or whatever it may be, and there's always that bit of, I'm a bit uncomfortable here. What can I say? What can't I say? What's going to be repeated? If you're doing media briefings, what can you say? What can't you say? You have to toe the line. But in this type of environment, because kind of, what goes in the room, what happens in the room stays in the room. But hopefully some learnings come out of that where people can go back and actually say, listen, we've heard from industry as a regulator. We've heard from industry. These are the challenges they really are facing. This is what they want to do about it. How do we help them? How do we not become necessarily a barrier? And I think the South African regulators are actually, very, very good at protecting consumers because obviously that's what they're set up to do, but protecting the economy. But they are, innovation pro-innovation, but it has to be done in a sensible way. So with solutions like yourselves, and we've got a few other sponsors, KPMG we've got coming, Smile ID, LexisNexis Risk Solutions. So, we're bringing together solutions providers that really understand the nature of these problems and the challenges that both sides face. If I was to ask you what you guys are looking forward to in the event, apart from the free glass of wine, but James, you are actually paying for it. But apart from the glass of wine, what are you guys looking forward to most?
Okay, so what we're really looking to get out of this is we want to see the next 5 to 10 years of where our customers' needs are going to be. Our clients are basically the largest financial institutions in Africa, and that's where you see really the coal face. They face all the problems on the hardest difficulty level. So for us to understand where their real pain points are, for people to be able to, at an industry level, speak openly about that, allows us to start see where we can start supporting them properly.
Yeah.
And that's obviously from a sort of self-involved what we want to get out of it. But I do think there's real benefit that can happen by thinking about our solutions to these problems a bit more openly and a bit differently. And I think there's a lot of learning from the different sort of stakeholders that will happen. And hopefully we'll see a bit more of sort of an adaptive, robust method around dealing with this.
And Brad, apart from the free dinner?
Once
That
again,
we
not
paid
free.
for.
Absolutely, you're still paying for it, but yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, no, James hit on a few good points there, but I mean, maybe from a less like inward-looking view, I think it's going to be really interesting to hear some of the learnings from not just the cold face of people sitting in large financial institutions, but from, let's call it the criminal side itself, right? Because that's really where you get interesting. I mean, what is the old saying, like, if you want to catch a criminal, behave or learn how the criminal behaves, right? And I think that is going to be some serious insights there, because, I mean, I'm hard-pressed to think about any other kind of forum or event where you've actually brought the people you're trying to catch to the table, right? And I think that's going to be super interesting. And I think also just the dialogue between everyone is going to be really interesting to hear what the commonalities are, what the common threads are. I mean, in an unintentional way, we had a breakfast roundtable a couple of weeks ago in Cape Town with a few industry players. And I mean, there was nothing said about privacy upfront or anything. It was just a breakfast roundtable, right? And once you actually got the conversation going and people felt comfortable enough to like partake, it became really interesting to see how varied the challenges are, but also how common they can be across different organizations. Yeah.
So it's kind of fostering those conversations, really. James, I really want to pick up on something you just said. So, for you're looking at how you can support your clients in 5 to 10 years or over the next 5 to 10 years. I imagine in your world or in the world of financial crime or cybercrime, and I've used this expression many times, so apologies, but it must be like whack-a-mole, right? So you combat one threat and suddenly another one pops up. Given the speed that technology and AI and machine learning and all of these other buzzwords that we talk about all the time, given how rapidly they're kind of evolving, is it possible to look that far forward in terms of 5 or 10 years? I mean, does anyone have an idea what sort of threats are going to be around? How do you plan in your world for 5 or 10 years' time?
I think it's difficult to know exactly what's going to happen. Obviously, there are no crystal balls.
Yeah.
But there are definite trends that we can see. Increasing use of digital currencies obviously creates brand new types of threats.
Yeah.
An increasingly multipolar world on a geopolitical level, which is going to be very difficult for multinationals to navigate. And possibly an increasingly unstable world, which leads to terrorism threats that need to be funded. You've got to launder the money somehow. But what we're also seeing, and this will continue, is increased onus on the financial institutions themselves to play a role that previously somewhat should actually be the remit of law enforcement. And that's not going to go away. And we feel the tools, so people, processes, and technology that are sitting inside your financial crime units right now are not future-proof. There's going to have to be a radical rethinking about what a sort of modern, digital-first, automated financial crime unit really looks like. And that's where we want to sort of figure out how to help our clients get there.
I guess, Brad, going back to your point about getting into the mind or hearing from criminals who are involved in this, this isn't some sort of guy in a cloak sitting in a garage with 10 screens above them sitting there coding, right? These are organizations, right? They're syndicates. They're large even states that are involved in this.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying we can get a state representative of an organised crime unit.
I don't think we would want to.
No, I'm not sure the regulators would like to come to that one. The Hawks would, I'm sure, but and Interpol. But So I suppose getting into the mind of these types of organisations and organised crime, this is a massive thing, right? As I said, this is not just someone sitting there, doing some code like you see in the movies. This is probably hundreds, if not thousands
systematic.
of people that are grouped together. So do you have foresight with your clients, or do you get reports from your clients in terms of the types of threats they're receiving? So are they receiving kind of the ping from the guy with the hoodie sitting there, or can they see these are organised crime syndicates that are trying to penetrate systems from a cyber perspective, which then they're trying to siphon funds from, or how does that work in your world?
Sure, that's a broad question because we're covering kind of cybersecurity with anti-money laundering. And I mean, just to be clear, we're very much in the anti-money laundering space. But sure, I mean, that doesn't mean that cyber criminals won't attack systems to then, try and launder money through it. Yeah. I mean, I don't have any like glaring insight from our customers into like what type of threats they're receiving. I don't know if James does. I mean, I think that's very sensitive data. But I think more importantly, it's just, and this is what you were talking about earlier, it's like, can you move or innovate as quickly as criminals can? Because humans, by virtue, that are facing a problem tend to come up with very creative solutions. Sure. The more you close them down. It's the same as doping or anything, right? Like sport. The guys who are doping will always try to be just a little bit ahead of the checks. And if the checks catch up with them, they will find very innovative ways to get around them or find a loophole in them. So it's about how can you keep up with the pace of innovation of these types of criminals, and can you find trends? And I think maybe because it's becoming increasingly digital, there might be an opportunity there. But James, I don't know if you've seen any like the types of attacks they're getting. I mean, obviously there's, with the advent of crypto, there's more going through that. But I mean, that's kind of obvious.
Yeah, I think it's almost the sort of general pattern is that organized crime is just getting much more transnational and much more organized. And what, as you say, it's not just some guy in a hoodie with 10 screens. You're looking at operations like Black Axe, which comes out of Nigeria initially, but is throughout Africa now. These are operations of 300-400 people, across, multiple time zones, committing essentially polycrime. So it's both fraud, it's money laundering, it's trafficking. But, they work like a business. There's a great paper by the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, which is a NGO based in South Africa, that really goes into the business of crime and how all of these different sort of industry verticals link to each other. So there's a dealing in violence business. There is obviously drug trafficking, human trafficking, racketeering, extortion. And what you're increasingly seeing is whereas criminal gangs used to specialize in one of these, they are diversifying.
Like a business.
Like a business, yes.
Amazing.
And, people have, I wouldn't quite call it OKRs, but, people get targets.
They do have OKRs. Steal as much money, do not get caught.
And you're seeing much more fluid link up between different territories, different countries. My general point there is that becomes a significant systemic threat to the economy. And unless we radically rethink our techniques and the way we collaborate as, hopefully the good guys, it's going to create a huge problem. It already is creating a huge problem. But it has to be a coordinated response using as advanced technology as criminals are.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it has to be a sort of a whole of society response.
Without getting into sort of specifics, because you've mentioned it a couple of times on sort of the world going digital currencies and that whole sort of crypto play, it must be very difficult because of the nature of cryptocurrency being decentralized to try and track sort of money laundering and what have you. Again, probably a topic for, definitely a topic for decoding fin crime. But is that adding complications, without going into too much detail, but is that adding further complications, especially when we've got, crypto regulated here in South Africa? We've got banks that are looking at sort of different blockchain solutions. We've got banks that are looking at whether they accept, cryptocurrencies on their ledgers and what have you, on balance sheets. Is that going to add a whole nother layer of complexity to AML?
So look, crypto is going to be a thing that stays around.
Yeah.
At least in South Africa, we have been quite proactive in regulation. It has enabled a whole new classes of crime. I mean, ransomware just wouldn't be possible if cryptocurrency didn't exist, because it's not like someone can give you their bank account details to accept the ransom.
Yeah. Please send me an EFT too.
Yeah,
it's not going to happen, is it?
Yeah. So it's definitely a problem, but it is also something that, the banks are proactively grappling with. I think there was this is scary, we're not going to touch it at all, period that went through, and a lot of banks stopped essentially banking crypto exchanges. But now it is more, we've got to figure out how this works. We're going to put in the effort. It's definitely a strategic project. We see it a lot of our customers to be able to manage this sort of on-chain and off-chain analysis. And really that sort of on-chain to off-chain interface is the most sort of problematic interface, because you can move crypto around, you can buy a few things with it, I guess, but ultimately you want to turn it into money that you can go buy normal assets with. So it's definitely a risk, but it must be a risk that's managed.
I can't imagine it's easy to buy bread and cheese on the dark web using Bitcoin. Not that I've tried.
It does happen.
Okay, you can. Okay.
Yeah.
Bread and cheese.
Bread and cheese.
Wow. Okay.
There are a few sports car dealerships that take Bitcoin in South Africa, but I think they might be linked to...
You can buy Woolworths gift cards
with Bitcoin.
Can you really?
Yeah.
Well, okay. Yeah. All right, amazing. Guys, let's just wrap up talking about the event one more time, because obviously you can tell that I'm very excited about this whole thing. So just to recap, it's on the 29th and 30th of August in Cape Town at an incredible venue. I'm not going to necessarily announce it here. You have to go onto the website to find out a little bit more about that. 200 people that have been hand-selected and cherry-picked. Invite only. I said it's not a vendor pitching contest whatsoever. We've been very selective on, again, who we've invited to come and sponsor this. The people coming to this event, we've mentioned regulators, we've mentioned policymakers, we've mentioned industry. Getting these people in a room together, I think, has been no mean feat, right? It's been a challenge. But the overwhelming feedback has been really, really positive. And I think it's because this is a very different type of setup. I don't think it's ever been seen in South Africa before. Obviously, there's lots of, conferences and talks around financial crime, and that's fine. They've got their place, but this is something completely different. What do you think? I'm going to ask you specifically, what do you think industry is looking to get out of this event? Why do you think there's been such an overwhelming positivity about coming to this specific event? What do you think they're looking to get out of it? Then I'm going to ask you what the regulators are looking to get out of it. We've already covered what you guys are as well. So let's just talk about regulators and industry. If you were to put yourselves in their shoes, why do you think there's been such an interest in coming to this event?
Industry, I think, probably want to get a few things out. I think James touched on one of them earlier when he was talking about what we want to get out for the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
I think industry want to do the same. They also want to know what do the next 5 to 10 years look like. They want to future-proof themselves, and they want to know, are our peers doing something, or have our peers got some insight or recognized, our industry peers, recognize something that we may have not thought of yet, so that we can also cover it off, right? So I think that's number one. And it's not about competition, because here we all are trying to solve like fighting crime here. I think that's one thing. I think more meaningful engagement with the regulator. But I think also, if you just think about the nature, and this is no disrespect to conferences or events in general, but if you just think about the nature of most of them, you can go to one anywhere around the world. They tend to be quite similar. Some may be more well produced than others, but ultimately you go in, you've got a main stage or two main stages, you've got a bunch of tracks of people talking, some panel discussions, and the old endearments on the table. I have a bit of a joke around that. And then you've got vendor stands all around, and the vendors are trying to sell to you, and people are trying to ultimately network with each other, mostly either trying to sell something to you or get something out of you. I mean, that's the truth of the matter. Yeah. And you might go there for some of the insights on the talks, but a lot of the talks might just be also, once again, vendor skewed. You do get some great ones where there's some fantastic panel discussions. But yeah, I mean, that's your typical like event and conference. And I think the feedback we got was like, there's no benefit in us going to another one of these to hear about a vendor who is now embarking on their ML journey as part of their product roadmap and trying to sell us something, right? They can disguise it under a very nice talk in the agenda, but ultimately once you get in there, you're going to be, first few slides are awesome and then you're going to get sold to you, right? And they're like, it's not a meaningful use of our time. So what we're looking for is meaningful engagement, looking for trends moving forward, and then discussing how we can stop these. So hopefully we have curated and planned an agenda and event that allows them to do that. Like you've already mentioned, no vendors are allowed to speak or pitch, right? There are no vendor stands. The formats are very different. The type of talks and people talking, ex-money launderers are very engaging topics. Closed room discussions, no cell phones, meaningful engagement, all very unique.
No endearments. No white tablecloths.
Well, we can still have an endearment. Nothing wrong with an endearment.
I'm not sure. I've made that a key thing here, right? And no sort of lukewarm water bottles either. So they're banned, right? No. And then, okay, so that's cool from industry. And then if you put your regulator hat on, I appreciate you're not a regulator, but if you were a regulator, what would you be looking to get out of something like this?
Well, ultimately, the regulators do not have the capacity on their own to meaningfully deal with this problem.
Yeah.
And really, if anything, that's always been true of anti-money laundering regulation. It is ultimately the financial industry is deputized basically to perform something that is somewhat a law enforcement-like activity. So from the regulator's point of view, they want to understand, A, how they can better facilitate their regulated entities, and what is a reasonable expectation for private industry? How much can they push down there, or make it sort of private industry's problem?
Yep.
How can they better facilitate that? And how can they get across to private industry what their real expectations are? Because they don't want to, just be auditing people all the time and fining and fining and fining. That's not the point. It's not an extractive exercise. It is meant to be sort of facilitating, rather, and ultimately protecting the economy and protecting the consumer.
Absolutely.
So for them to be able to express their views on what good looks like and what at a national level and an international level their challenges are, this is a great forum for them to be able to do that a bit more openly.
Amazing. Guys, thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to hosting you guys at Decoding Financial Crime. For those of you who are interested in finding out a little bit more about it and the venue and some more details on the agenda and the speakers as well, we'll put the link below here so you can have a look around. Not sure by the time you see this how many tickets will be left, but please reach out to us if you are desperate to come. We'll see if we can make a plan. Guys, thank you. Any passing sort of last words from you before I let you go for a nice long weekend?
I think it's time for a beer.
I think it's time for a beer. Yeah, absolutely. There we go. Guys, thank you again.
Thank you for
Thanks a lot,
Darren.
Awesome.
Cheers.